From Bass Pro Shops, Senior Director of Conservation, Bob Ziemer.
Hey, good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you today talking about conservation. As we head into 2017, a new year, I've been reflecting back on the past and experiences growing up in Missouri. I reflect back on how I spent the summers, and really it's time spent afield with family and friends that have created those treasured moments. In the summers, I recall spending time down at the creek, skipping rocks with friends, or as it got close to evening, going to the farm pond, casting a topwater lure, fishing for bass. Of course, in the fall, in the winter, my father and I would follow bird dogs across the country. And in the spring, I could be found on the tractor looking for arrowheads as my grandfather worked the land. Today, I spend as much time as I can with family in the out of doors. To me, there's just something special about watching a sunrise over a frost-covered field, hearing the sound of a wild turkey gobble, hiking through the woods and smelling the fresh smell of the leaves, and even on days like today, just feeling that cold wind from a January. These are the experiences that really got me interested, developed a passion for the outdoors and wildlife, and the reason I pursued a degree to be a field biologist over 30 years ago. Today, at Bass Pro Shops, I am thrilled to help individuals get engaged with, inspired by wildlife, and really create a love for the out of doors. Before joining Bass Pro Shops this last year, I spent over 25 years with the Missouri Department of Conservation, the last 6.5 years serving as the director of that organization. What I've found over the years, many times I've experienced firsthand the significance that conservation plays in America's quality of life and our economic diversity, our economic prosperity. This is a story that far too many citizens have never heard or are not familiar with. If we look just at the state of Missouri, how many in the audience today realize that our forest, fish, and wildlife resources support just over 100,000 Missouri jobs? Generates $12.4 billion annually in economic activity for this state. If tourism is important, those resources are credited for 1/4, one out of every 4 tourism dollar collected by this state, 25%. Our fish and wildlife resources are important to individuals, to communities, to the state, and to the nation. And when we look out across our nation compared to other countries, the resources we have are nothing short of amazing. Looking only at Missouri, the home of 417, the state of Missouri currently has 14 million acres of forest land. We have a healthy deer herd, strong turkey flock, abundant fish species, and tremendous habitats that are now supporting wildlife from prairie chickens to black bear, elk, to bald eagles. On the social side, because when you talk about conservation and conservation investments, you need to look at the social side. Missouri currently is a state with a population of 6 million citizens. Within that number, we have an astounding 1.2 million anglers, 800,000 hunters, and 2.2 million people that call themselves self-proclaimed wildlife watchers. These are incredible numbers. I know I'm a little bit biased towards Missouri, but if you look at surveys that look out across our nation, there is high citizen interest in conservation of our natural resources. But it's not always been this way. In the late 1800s, many wildlife species in the state of Missouri had already been reduced or eliminated as Americans continued the westward progress. Society's philosophy was dramatically different during that time period. The approach often was, the resources are here, they're abundant, shoot it, utilize it. No voices were raised against such an unwise approach. Truth was, most citizens felt forest resources or wildlife resources were so plentiful there was no way they would be depleted, ever. At the time, there were no restrictions on hunting. First came the fur traders, followed by individuals that were mining the ground for minerals. Following the miners were settlers, and all too often, the land and wildlife was laid to waste. Stories like this were playing out all across our nation. And many species, big game species, Rocky Mountain elk, pronghorn antelope, bighorn sheep, bison, were on the brink of being eliminated. So you might ask, what was the turning point? What changed? In this country, something amazing happened at that point. Hunters and anglers got together and started a crusade, a movement. Again, most people in the country at the time thought what they faced was impossible. This movement was not going to succeed. You see, they were facing strong opposition in a political climate that was focused on pleasing big business. But as that crusade, as that movement grew, here's a photo from 1908. President Theodore Roosevelt called leaders, hunters, and anglers for a discussion, for a gathering, to talk about what was happening and what could be done. And those discussions led to the modern conservation movement that we know today. A quote from Theodore Roosevelt rings true today. He said, "This nation behaves well if it treats its natural resources as assets, which it must turn over to the next generation increased in value and not impaired." The result of that meeting, and really the result of the unwavering commitment of hunters and anglers to change the course of the nation on how it viewed its fish and wildlife resources, is awesome. It's used as a model around the world. You see, they continued in such a way that they were successful in implementing self-imposed regulations, restrictions on hunting, on fishing, and the use of a number of other natural resources. They saw firsthand that if they did not do something, those resources that they thought could never be depleted would be lost. They also stepped up and chose to fund conservation services, enforcement, early restoration efforts. And for the last century, hunters and anglers have been paying for wildlife management in this country through implementing hunting tags, fishing licenses, special federal excise taxes on products, many of which are sold at Bass Pro Shops, are what fund state fish and wildlife agencies even today to implement needed wildlife management services and habitat initiatives. Why do I tell you all of this? The resources that we have in our nation today and in our state of Missouri are not by accident. Many individuals have chosen to invest, to sacrifice, to see that resources are managed in a sustainable way. Hard-fought political battles have been won, and the realization that wildlife belongs to all citizens in this country, not to any corporation, not to any government, and not to any individual. And at the time, even today, as we look around the world, that is a really important fact that separates the United States from many other countries. You see, in Europe, the King's Woods and all of the game that are contained within it are not available to the average citizen. State of Missouri today, as well as the United States, we recognize more fully that our natural resources, including wildlife, represent the health and the wealth of the country and its people. So, I've shared a little bit of a background and a story. 100 years ago, individuals took steps, leadership role. We have wildlife on our landscape today. No issues, right? Hardly. There are still conservation challenges out there. I would say they're different than those of the past, but they're no less daunting than the challenges facing the nation in the early 1900s. Bass Pro Shops founder and CEO Johnny Morris is a visionary. Not just a visionary as an entrepreneur, but a visionary as a conservationist. He understands and is quick to communicate the most important thing we can do for the future of the outdoor recreational industry is to invest in the future of conservation and work to address key needs. You see this in our mission. Our conservation mission at Bass Pro Shops is to work to inspire individuals to engage, love, and conserve the great outdoors. We work hard at Bass Pro Shops to make sure those are not just words on a piece of paper, but we put them in action. In 2015, Johnny Morris felt compelled to call a summit. He called national conservation leaders, state and national conservation leaders, together for a meeting. It was inspired by the meeting that President Theodore Roosevelt held over 100 years ago. These leaders spent a couple days talking about issues and talking about how they could and should be addressed in this country. Our organization, Bass Pro Shops, our employees, our customers, and partners are today working to address 3 significant conservation issues. And in so doing, we are starting a new era in conservation leadership in this country. The first challenge is wildlife and habitat. Ongoing development in this country has had a profound impact on wildlife. This is an undisputable fact. In a country where we once thought these resources could not be depleted, we now realize we need to conserve, we need to protect, and we need to work to enhance habitat if we hope to have thriving wildlife populations to hand off to the next generation. Bass Pro Shops is working not only to ensure the habitat is enhanced, we're working to make sure needed research is implemented along with those habitat enhancements. Looking over North America, over the past years, Bass Pro Shops' efforts have enhanced millions of acres across North America. In so doing, we have increased populations of hundreds of native species, from the northern prairie pothole region in Canada to the southern tip of Florida. Bass Pro Shops continues to strategically invest in wildlife habitat. One close to home story would be reservoirs are important in 417. And a few years ago, we noticed fish populations were declining in those aging reservoirs. Bass Pro Shops called together state and national leaders and co-founded the National Fish Habitat Partnership. The very first project that partnership implemented was on Table Rock Lake, putting back aquatic habitat for the fish species long term. That project, along with research collected, is now used across the nation as a model. Since 2007, over 600 major aquatic habitat projects have been implemented in spanning all 50 states and also increasing 1,500 riverway miles. Those are the kind of efforts that are making a difference for America's fisheries. The second challenge is working to advocate for sportsmen's rights and the outdoors. Bass Pro Shops, we're working hard to increase access to the outdoors, regardless if you find yourself in the heart of an urban area, or you grew up in outstate Missouri like I did, or somewhere where access to the resource is absolutely essential if we want somebody to develop that passion and that commitment to grow into a leader that's going to influence the future of this country. We're also working hard to protect our outdoor heritage and Second Amendment rights. We work to ensure that policies are put in place that are good for wildlife and people that enjoy the wildlife. In this country, it's all too easy to forget about our freedoms, about that revelation I talked about earlier, the realization that we all own wildlife in this country. Also, land that's managed by local, state, or federal governments is ours. It belongs to the citizens. We work hard to communicate to public officials to make sure they have an understanding of this, to make sure that they know the importance of the outdoor heritage, its economic impact to the country, and it's how it enhances our quality of life as individuals and also as our country. Working to ensure our outdoor heritage is maintained and recreational access for every individual is worth fighting for and it's worth protecting. The third challenge is connecting new audiences to the outdoors. There's a lot of information out there. The National Wildlife Federation is communicating that just in the last 20 years, the amount of time that kids spend outdoors has decreased by over half. That's a massive change. How do we inspire, how do we encourage, how do we get individuals to spend more time out of doors. At Bass Pro Shops, we're using our retail locations as a gateway to nature. In Springfield, the state of Missouri tells us that's our Springfield store, that's the #1 tourist attraction in the state, drawing over 4 million visitors each year to that location. From Bass Pro's point of view, each of those visitors is an opportunity to inspire an individual to want to know more about natural resources and to spend more time outside. As examples, last year alone, over 100,000 kids caught a fish, many for the first time, at a Bass Pro sponsored event. Here in the Ozarks, at the free outdoor day events, we had over 40,000 individuals that showed up to learn about boating, hiking, camping, hunting, wildlife identification, and so much more. We're also working to create world-class conservation and wildlife attractions. Dogwood Canyon Nature Park, a wildlife reserve run by a not-for-profit created by Johnny Morris, allows every year thousands of individuals to show up to learn about wildlife, enjoy fishing, and learn about outdoor recreation. Perhaps the largest investment is still to come. The Wonders of Wildlife Museum and Aquarium. This will be the largest, most immersive fish and wildlife attraction in the world. Johnny's investment will be recognized and respected for its leadership and conservation and education based right here in the Ozarks. When you look at the construction, obviously one of the largest construction projects in the region, I would argue definitely one of the most unique projects occurring here in the Ozarks. We've had over 2,000 contractors working on this facility, everything from architects to engineers to animal care individuals, and the list goes on. Wonders of Wildlife Museum and Aquarium. A little bit about it. It will have 1.5 million gallons of aquarium adventure, 35,000 plus fish species, reptiles, mammals, birds, representing 850 species. It will allow visitors to get eye to eye with animals from the Amazon to the Arctic. To me, Wonders of Wildlife serves as a great reminder that wonders are not found on the screen or a smartphone, but out in the field, in the lakes, and in the woods. So as we head into 2017, I must confess, I am going to spend time reflecting back in the past, but I'm looking to the future with excitement and enthusiasm. And my New Year's resolution is to spend more time outside with family and friends. And I'm 13 days into it, and I'm doing fairly well. Right after the new year, my wife and I were hiking out at our property. Just one of those special days. We just started our hike, and we walked up on a barred owl. And for whatever reason, it was roosted rather low in an eastern red cedar. It was tolerant of us as we walked past, and as only a barred owl can, it turned its head, and we watched as it monitored our progress. It had its feathers fluffed out to hold the warmth in, and it's just striking beauty. And as we continued on that hike, I thought, that's the highlight of the day. I was wrong. At one moment, when we paused, a bald eagle soared overhead, and my wife and I stopped and looked at that majestic bird and all it represents to this country, and all that investment and sacrifice that individuals that came before us committed to putting in place so that we could have that privilege to see that bird. Now, you can read books about bald eagles, you can see movies about bald eagles, but being able to see one and having the bird up close and just being amazed with its size, with its amazing plumage, and just looking into its eyes and the predatory nature in which it tracks. A bird that needs more than just one state to survive. This is a migratory animal. Some eagles travel well up into Canada. The cold weather pushes them back down into Missouri. But we do have bald eagles now that are nesting in Missouri. Incredible success. Let's never take for granted the investment that individuals that have come before us have laid out so that our generation can experience this. Let's recognize the responsibility we each bear as citizens of this great country, as owners of our wildlife together. What I need to tell you now is Johnny Morris and Bass Pro Shops has never been more invested in conservation and community across the nation or right here in the Ozarks than we are right now. Our investments for somebody like me are staggering. When you look at 6,000 Bass Pro jobs in the Ozarks, 2,300 of those created in the last 3 years alone. But Johnny is quick to say we're going to measure our success of those investments on our long-term conservation advancements. This bald eagle, as well as a barred owl, is going to be in the hall during the break. We would encourage and welcome you to come up, ask questions about these individuals. If you've not had a close encounter, please do that. This is a special time, a great opportunity. We have some amazing handlers of these birds that can tell you about the life history. But what I'm here to close with is to challenge each and every one of us as we head into a new year. It's an exciting time. We have a great country, and we have resources that continue to shape our wealth and our health of our nation. Get involved. Be a part of advancing and investing in conservation. Bass Pro Shops welcomes your partnership. We encourage you to get outside, enjoy nature, and take somebody with you. I do appreciate your patience, and again, during the break, give us a few minutes. It will take just a little bit of time to get the birds out to the break area, but I appreciate your patience. Thank you so much.